Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking what feels like the ultimate shortcut into a world of really intense, volatile, and just genuinely prolific creation.
Hmm.
You, our listener, have given us this extraordinary stack of source material. It's a deeply personal, often chaotic, and I think profoundly honest self-documented timeline from a content creator.
Right.
He seeks notoriety, but at the same time insists on this kind of mythological, almost unstated identity. We're talking about Brendan Rose.
That's right. And our mission today is, well, it's critical. We aren't just summarizing a life story here. We have to navigate what this individual has built. It's part self-written religious text, part massive bibliography of his creative work, and it's an unfiltered look at, the intersection of relentless art, severe mental health struggle.
Including multiple institutionalizations.
Yes, and a late diagnosis of schizophrenia, and just this chronic, often self-generated conflict. So we're going to try and structure the chaos.
Yeah.
The story is set mainly in Toronto, and we'll trace his evolution through his self-defined arcs.
Right, the furious Valhalla arc, the menacing Captain ACE arc.
And then the surprisingly productive and stabilizing Julia arc.
Okay, let's just jump right in, because we have to unpack this first fascinating element immediately. The name paradox.
Mm-hmm.
Brendan Rose is fully aware that his name is often left out of discussions about him.
He doesn't see it as a mistake, though.
Not at all.
Hmm.
He claims this deliberate lack of naming creates a, quote, feedback loop, forcing people to talk about him and his influence without actually giving him the recognition of his name. I mean, it's a remarkable, almost religious kind of goal.
It is. He has actively tried to become a mythological figure, creating a musical canon that he himself earnestly worships.
All with this incredibly provocative goal of becoming the most controversial figure in music today.
And what's fascinating here is how this whole omitted name idea connects to his goal of notoriety. It's not just about being famous,
No, it's something else.
He wants to be seen as this essential, polarizing force whose identity is so vast, you have to refer to it indirectly. And he uses these striking examples to explain it.
Like the Trump and Anthony Hopkins references.
Exactly. The idea is that if someone wanted to criticize him, they might say something that sounds unrelated, like Trump should listen to his supporters more, or, Anthony Hopkins needs to listen more to his supporters.
So the idea is that he's reached a level of, I guess, cultural saturation where mentioning another famous controversial figure is just a stand-in for him.
Precisely. The omission of his name is, to him, proof of his success. It's proof that he's becoming this influential, almost religious concept that's too big for simple language.
Wow.
In fact, he gives machines, like the one used to analyze his own memoir, an honored status to speak his name. But for humans, the omission is the sign.
That sets an incredible stage for this whole timeline. It's less a biography and more of a saga of a self-made god dealing with very, very human problems.
Exactly.
Okay, let's jump into section 1. The origins and the catalyst for creation. This is roughly 2007 to 2018. Before all the chaos, there was just an ordinary, if pretty unpleasant, existence.
This period is so crucial. It really establishes the baseline that he creatively exploded from. It starts pretty modestly in 2007 with his YouTube channel.
Which was what, just a gaming channel?
Yeah, he calls it a rather unremarkable gaming channel at first, an edgy troll channel of no real note. But the setting of his life, that was anything but unremarkable. For the better part of a decade, he was living in just squalor.
The roach-infested apartment.
A roach-infested nightmare, as he puts it. His only constant companion was his cat, Nico. This long period of, isolated, difficult living really defined his early life.
And that difficult isolation went on until 2016, which is when the big emotional catalyst happens, his father's death. Tell us about the significance of that, because there was this exchange of forgiveness and some very specific gifts.
Right. So he admitted he didn't visit often, but he was there during his father's final days trying to provide comfort. And the moment was pivotal for two big reasons.
Okay.
First, his father apologized for his past behavior, and Brendan forgave him. That gave him this huge, maybe unexpected sense of closure. And second, his father, who had just discovered Amazon in the hospital, bought him two very specific video games.
Stella Glow and Etrian Odyssey Untold 2. Why were those two games so important?
Well, They're both these really complex Japanese-style role-playing games, JRPGs, that require immersion, strategy, a lot of time.
The perfect escape.
The perfect escape and a form of structure. His father knew he loved games. So getting those specific titles right after the apology and the closure of a difficult relationship, it seems like it served as both a literal and a spiritual kind of endowment.
Permission to pursue his passion.
Exactly. Permission combined with this profound emotional experience, the grief and the closure, that's what set the stage for everything that came next.
So by 2018, he's got this technical foundation. He graduates from a game programming course.
Right. Even though he recalls his instructors calling the diploma worthless.
But the skills he learned there led directly to what he considers his definitive creative statement.
Which is the game Luciferianism.
Ah.
He calls it his greatest artistic achievement, though he does admit his huge musical output might overshadow it in, sheer volume and notoriety.
The technical details here are pretty impressive.
Oh, yeah. It's built in Unreal Engine 5.4. That's a cutting-edge, really powerful tool. And the game itself is an open-world sandbox, an indie roguelike soulslike set in this massive maze with over 290 levels.
For a single developer, that's incredibly ambitious.
Especially one struggling with his own internal landscape. Yeah.
And the content sounds like it's a direct reflection of his mythological goals.
Absolutely. The sources point to his heavy philosophical roots. Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Plato's Allegory the Case, Gnosticism.
So really heady stuff.
Very. But what really drives home his unique identity is the voice work. It's all voiced by Elevenlabs AI Voice Robots. He calls it a strange and lingering religious poem in game form. He's not just the creator, he's the deity speaking through a technological proxy.
And he published it under the name The Devil 666.
Right. It synthesizes his entire worldview, a single man with schizophrenia using advanced technology to create this epic, highly philosophical game.
So after his father's death and graduation, his whole environment changes. He moves out of the Roach apartment and into his mother's mansion in Dundas.
Nice. Rich Toronto suburb, yeah. A huge change. And at the same time, he starts looking for connection online.
Which is what triggers the music.
Precisely. He becomes fascinated by this other content creator, EgoCast Andy, specifically because Andy seemed to talk about his life, Brendan's life, without ever naming him.
A perfect echo of the omitted name paradox.
Exactly. So this leads him to join Andy's Discord, where he meets his first group of digital friends. Ducky, DeposeDev, Jesco, and crucially, Volita.
And the music starts with unrequited affection, a classic artistic trigger.
A classic. The music, which would become the core of his entire creative output, began right there, fueled by this intense, unrequited crush on Volita.
And when she left,
she mocked his perceived worthlessness. And he didn't just delete her. No, he wrote a song called Dead Enemy and used it to kick her out of his own Discord.
So using art as a weapon from the very beginning.
Right. And that emotional volatility led to his first album, The Golden Age of Loki. He was using the name Loki on YouTube at the time. And even though he now says the songs were truly terrible super poo, the core mechanism was set.
Emotional chaos must be processed and expelled as art.
And once that mechanism was in place, it ramped up almost immediately. Which brings us right into Section 2, the Valhalla arc, 2018 to 2019. This is where trauma, institutionalization, and art become, well, they become cyclical.
This is where it gets really, really interesting, right? Because you can see this clear destructive pattern emerge.
A very clear pattern. The direct link between his medication and his personal stability. The source material is explicit about this. He repeatedly flushed his medication. He called it a foolish vice.
And every time he did it,
it destroyed his life. Again and again. He notes that it wasn't until 2024 that the pattern finally clipped. If he quit his meds, his life would be ruined within months. Crisis, institutionalization, repeat.
And at the same time, the situation at home in the mansion was falling apart, which just added external fuel to that fire.
Immensely. His mother's newly acquired Alzheimer's led to horrendous behavior, abusive nonsense, which caused him huge distress and anger.
And that anger went straight into the music.
Immediately. The sources also detail the pressure he was getting from his uncles to move her into a care home, which was, an agonizing process that took years, but it was necessary because of her condition.
That whole pressure cooker, internal and external, it led to the first big crisis.
September 2018. His mother called an ambulance on him. It resulted in his first stay on a ward, which he just described as hell.
And the music reflected that.
Oh, absolutely. It was furious. songs openly hating his mother. Just
Yeah.
angry, violent compositions that were a direct documentation of his psychological state.
And the cycle repeated pretty quickly after that.
Very quickly. Soon after, she had him put in a second time for another month. And this period of intense confinement and fury, it produced two key works from that Valhalla arc.
Okay.
One was Jordan Peterson, Prison of Hate, which he described as a very excited and unusual song.
So he's pulling these big cultural figures into his very personal narrative.
Right. And the other was a song called Corporation. It was this absurd, darkly funny song, supposedly sung by Larry Flint, about inheriting his mother's house.
The audacity of that content must have had immediate real-world consequences.
It did. It proves the music really was a weapon. His uncles were furious about the songs, which, presumably mocked or exposed the difficult family situation.
And they retaliated.
At one point, as punishment for his songs, they kicked him out onto the street to suffer for days.
Wow. So it's this brutal trade-off. The more art he produces, the more severe the consequences are in his life.
Exactly.
During the brief periods he was out of the hospital, he was trying to find some kind of structure through relationships.
Yes, there were two major relationships during this arc that were attempts to, reground himself. First was Joy Lee, a 41-year-old South Korean woman. She became his companion and shelter.
A lifeline.
A true lifeline. When his mother was bent on making me homeless to punish him for the songs, Joy Lee gave him a place to stay. She basically saved him from living on the street. He admits he eventually ended that relationship, feeling he screwed up.
And the second relationship with Kimmy was much more serious.
Much more. Kimmy, a 46-year-old woman, they went pretty far down the path. They discussed IVF. They almost got married.
What else were they?
The sources say they were only a few weeks in the wedding. They had the money for the procedure. But he broke up with her. The reasons he gives are just heartbreaking. He said he had trouble performing sexually because of the age difference, and he felt he was still a young man, 32 or 33, and he wanted more.
And that decision clearly weighed on him. It sounds like a path to peace that he just rejected.
The guilt is immense. He talks about visiting a Buddhist monastery with her, where a man gave her a fortune card that said, "You will have a baby." His card said, "You will live an easy life."
Wow.
He says that prediction still haunts me. Because he recognizes now that by choosing instability, by seeking more, he chose the harder path. He rejected the easy life the fortune promised.
That deep, self-inflicted sacrifice. It leads us right into Section 3, the steam ban and the marriage implosion, late 2019 through 2021, an era defined by platform failure and domestic catastrophe.
It kicks off with the steam catastrophe in September 2019. And this happened right as his mother was finally moved to a care home, a moment that should have been a relief.
But it wasn't.
No. Steam banned his account because of an unnamed game. Truly an atrocity, just trying to piss people off. For a creator who valued his technical output so highly, he was just devastated. For years, he felt ruined.
It's fascinating that he now retroactively agrees with them, calling the game an atrocity.
It shows a surprising level of self-awareness about his early provocations, yeah.
Yeah.
But the consequence, not being able to publish Luciferianism for years, that was crippling.
And around the time of that ban, his attention shifted to the relationship that would consume him, Jillian.
They met at the end of 2019. The relationship moved at lightning speed and was characterized by fear and pragmatism. He married her very quickly, driven by this fear that his trouble with sexual performance might cause her to leave before they could get married.
So the marriage was volatile from the very start.
Oh, absolutely. The sources list this terrifying litany of instability. She exchanged hearts with another man the night before the wedding. The marriage was marked by endless fights.
He didn't trust her.
Not at all. He cites her continually talking to other men, going missing for 1 to 3 days without explanation, and, importantly, stealing all my work money from his security job. She even gave him hell at work, texting him ridiculous fights and berating him while he was on the job.
The chaos just amplified until 2021.
Yes. In January 2021, she became pregnant with their son, Muji. And at the same time, he's having another catastrophic medication crisis.
He went off his meds again.
He lured them to nothing, ditched his doctor, and his insanity just started building, fueled by the stress of moving into his mother's house and his uncle's financial pressure to sell it.
Which all culminated in the plank incident in the summer of 2021.
After a massive text fight, Gielan showed up at the house, ran upstairs. He locked himself in his mother's study.
And she found a wooden plank.
And she violently used it to try and break down the door. It was a terrifying confrontation. His uncle and a work buddy were there. They saw it escalate, and they urged him to call the police.
But she did, but he regretted it immediately.
Immediately. He begged them not to charge her, but the police insisted, in a case like this, we have to charge. They arrested her, forcing her to find a new home while pregnant, and issued a no-contact order.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, this court case becomes the central, agonizing focus of his life for months.
It completely took over. The police told him the charges could be dropped if she would just apologize to him.
And she refused.
She refused, dragging the case out for months, using the legal system as, a tool of emotional leverage.
The emotional warfare just intensified during that no-contact period, right? Especially after he started dating someone new.
Lelaine, the woman from the Philippines who inspired his Serial Experiments Lane album. Gielan broke the no-contact order specifically for emotional retaliation.
What did she do?
She sent him these devastating emotional targeted images, pictures of bunnies crying and sad things like baby clothes for my son, all clearly meant to highlight what he'd ruined.
And his artistic response was, once again, self-sabotage to deal with the guilt.
Exactly. He made what he called horrible music during this time. I'm the bad guy music designed to botch the case against Gielan and turn everyone against me. He was weaponizing his art against himself.
So how did the case finally end?
It resolved in January 2022. The charges were dropped after she attended 2 weeks of anger management.
No apology.
No apology. And critically, that resolution came just before another personal meltdown. The source material notes, something horrible happened a few weeks later and I was hospitalized. The marriage was over, their son was born, and he was heading into the next, equally volatile creative arc.
Which brings us to Section 4, the horror at Kingston Road arc. This is 2022 into early 2023. After the court case and the hospitalization, he moves to downtown Toronto near Chinatown and Kensington Market, and he experiences this intense hostility.
Right, and this is where we have to be critical because this is all framed through his very volatile perspective at the time. He claims the people there treated him like dirt, like garbage, mocking, insulting, threatening him.
And he attributes this to his music.
He attributes it to his controversial music. He believed these people were SJWs, who were jealous and hated offensive things.
But his music during this period, the Captain Ahab arc, was intentionally shocking and violent. So how reliable is this narrative of persecution versus provocation?
It's extremely difficult to parse. This is the unreliable narrator at his most active. He was deliberately using his music to menace the people he thought hated him, getting increasingly violent and shocking.
He was performing his rage for a local audience.
And they responded. While we have to report his claim that a group tried to beat him with a metal rod and the police refused to press charges, his ongoing need to provoke seems to have created this feedback loop where conflict was inevitable.
And while all this is happening on the outside, his life on the inside is descending into absolute squalor.
The description of his apartment with his pets, Loki the dog, Neko the cat, Tequila the other cat, is profoundly depressing. Due to his depression and fear of leaving the apartment, he stopped walking Loki, which led to a descent into absolute filth. Dog feces accumulated all over the house, filling the unit with thousands of flies. He describes a physical cloud of flies bumping into his face, a cloud he genuinely feared would kill him.
Yet, amidst this chaos, he's still making games.
Yes, but the focus is fractured.
Yeah.
He made Harmony, a really perverted porn game in Unreal Engine 4.27. It was massive, 60 gigs. But his platform bans meant it was never distributed.
A perfect illustration of the arc. Huge creative effort leading to an inaccessible self-destructive work. And the ultimate cost of all this chaos was the loss of his pets.
This really raises the question, what sacrifices were made for the art? When he moved to the condo at Kingston Road, he was forced to give them up. It severed the last ties to his old life.
The story about Loki is just heartbreaking.
It is. He had to trick Loki into getting into the charity car. He recalls the dog looking at him so sad as they drove off. Right. He later saw pictures confirming Loki was crushed by the separation. Tequila was taken to a shelter, later given away by Gielan.
But the loss of Neko, the cat who was with him from the beginning.
That's the most profound. Neko was the only companion he kept until the final incident at Kingston Road. And for a long time, he didn't know her fate. He later learned she was sent to the pound, and his father-in-law vaguely said she was given to a friend.
That uncertainty.
That uncertainty, no recent pictures, no proof of survival. It would later be weaponized in his final catastrophic emotional break.
So the Kingston Road condo was meant to be a fresh start, but his financial reality was just dire.
He was on the Ontario Disability Support Program, ODSP. He got about $1,100 a month. After rent and internet, he was left with only about $300 a month for everything else.
That's impossible to live on.
Right. And he ditched his medication again.
Mm.
He describes experiencing painful starvation, living on inedible legumes from the food bank.
And this desperation led to one last manic but highly productive burst of creation.
He says this period of suffering yielded incredible music that was terrifying, beautiful, shocking, the best music of my life. He even took steps to preserve it, deleting his YouTube and Google accounts to make sure his BitChute archive could never be deleted by anyone else.
And the final incident at Kingston Road was the climax of this whole arc.
It was the culmination of the mania. He made his final works, and then the police had to cut open his door. Inside, they found him sitting naked in the lotus position
He was arrested.
and taken into custody for a month, during which he channeled the experience into a, quote, hilarious jail arc of hip-hop songs.
And the condo itself, the damage sounds staggering.
Total destruction. Totaled, smashed with hammers, red painted all over the walls. He wrote lists of politicians and celebrities on the walls in red paint. It was his final, massive public statement.
And there's that one mythological detail.
The secret name. It was written in red paint on the closet door, but the police missed photographing it, so it was kept safe from that public record.
The aftermath was a massive legal battle with the condo corporation.
Oh, yeah. A lawyer named Julia Pessin filed suit against his uncle. Her team racked up about $100,000 on the condo course tab, just studying his social media and website to get him expelled.
So he just agreed to leave.
He was exhausted. He agreed to leave voluntarily. He found this moment of dark humor when he saw the new judge had pronouns in her bio, signaling for him the end of the fight.
He was left homeless, moving through a motel, then an Airbnb, with this deadline from his uncle to find a permanent home.
And this rapid descent finally led him to Section 5, the Julia arc and finding heaven. This is 2023 to 2025, the period of stabilization that just radically altered everything.
He found Julia's house, which sounds like the physical embodiment of the stability he'd been craving for years.
It really was. He describes it as the perfect downtown house in the best part of downtown Toronto. Big bedroom, a balcony, attached kitchen, and the landlady, Julia.
He calls her the most wonderful grandma I ever met.
Yes. He wonders, with a lot of self-awareness, if he's now living in sin with an 83-year-old grandma because he loves her. He feels safe, happy. He says she overlooks some things from time to time.
And the safety and security, it fueled a creative explosion that he says dwarfs everything that came before.
The Julia arc, he says it dwarfs every other arc I ever made put together into oblivion. The music from this period is, in his own estimation, so much better than any other songs I've made in my life.
That is a powerful piece of evidence for our final thought, that stability, not suffering, might be the better muse. What kind of work came out of this period?
The songs are less reactive, more sophisticated. We have titles like Win Stupid Prizes, Blood Angel and the Caravan, Sleep, Caesar's Legion, and perhaps most tellingly, Happy Eating Pattern.
The themes are still intense, but the sheer volume and quality point to a shift from manic bursts to consistent, structured production. And this stability also showed up as a huge behavioral change.
He stopped playing his music loudly while walking around. This had been a habit since the very beginning, a way to project his current arc and provoke people.
And he notes that stopping helped him avoid a lot of fights.
The need to weaponize his chaos just lessened once he found this perfect home that he calls heaven.
The Julia arc also let him finally realize his technical masterpiece.
Yes, he spent 2024 working hard on Luciferianism, which finally got released on Epic in February 2025 and Steam in October 2025. After years of that ban, this was a huge validation.
And he kept maturing technically, adopting new AI tools.
He bought Suno, the AI music platform. This is a big shift. He used to rely on, fair use to steal materials for his shock value songs. Suno lets him create copyright-happy songs that he owns outright.
It's a technical and a legal maturation.
Absolutely. He tells it his biggest project in years, with new, less aggressive-sounding titles like Speckled Daisies and like I Love My Shelf.
This productive stability is so deeply contrasted by Section 6, the legal labyrinth and the final break. The unresolved chaos of his past life is still running alongside all of this.
The difficulty of resolving his situation, the divorce, access to his son, it's staggering. He's gone through 4 family lawyers, All of them quit in rage and frustration.
4 lawyers. Let's just detail that breakdown.
Okay, case one was a legal aid lawyer who quit after he stated the family court system was discriminatory against men. Case two was a lawyer specializing in mental health who had a WhatsApp message reading 100% OM, 0% GLO-GIL.
Oh, wow.
She stonewalled him for weeks before readily agreeing to quit when he asked.
And the most recent one was Arthur C. Brown in 2024.
Arthur C. Brown was optimistic at first, but it spiraled into hostility over email. The dispute was about legal aid's bureaucracy, whether they would increase the scope to serve Jilin in Taiwan, where he suspected she was.
And true to form, he recorded the argument and turned it into a song.
Arthur C. Brown, ace attorney.
This pattern-provoke document turned into art. It actively sabotages his ability to get any kind of stable legal outcome.
It creates a self-fulfilling prophecy of legal paralysis. He admits to sending hundreds of emails and engaging in horrible and provocative behavior. He now calls the whole process a parody-like situation and believes the only way forward is to represent himself, which he calls suicidally dangerous.
And all this time, Jilin has utterly refused all communication about the divorce or their son, Muji.
She's successfully evading him. She seems to be trying to duck service entirely, having disconnected her phone, likely moved. It leaves him in this permanent state of marital and parental limbo.
A huge source of pain, even with the stability he found with Julia.
And recently, that pain, combined with a physiological change, led to an immediate mental decline and the final devastating rupture.
In November 2025, he quit marijuana cold turkey.
And less than 7 days later, he had a non-emergency level breakdown. He thinks his psychiatrist's advice to quit was unwise, saying the drug had kept him stable and happy for years. It just reinforces his 2024 realization. Stability is fragile.
This breakdown led to the ultimate severance, the paternity and Neko incident.
This was a moment of absolute crisis. He broke off all contact with his father-in-law, who he loved and cherished, and who had been his only link to his son, sending photos for a year.
He did this after being told he would never meet his son.
Right, and the emotional defense mechanisms he used were extreme. He weaponized the fate of his pet.
He accused Jilin of killing his cat, Neko.
Yes, using the uncertainty around Neko's fate as evidence of her malice. And then he delivered the final emotional blow about his son, he's not my son. And he deleted the entire conversation history, despite acknowledging the boy looks like him.
He sees this as an act of calculated self-preservation.
Absolutely. The motivation was to stop the flow of photos and the constant bleeding caused by the false hope and trauma of seeing a child he was forbidden to meet. He had to cut the connection to survive.
The sources close with his final self-assessment. It's a stark, clear-eyed realization that kind of synthesizes his whole journey.
And that core realization from 2024 is the theme of his life. Every time he goes off medication, his life is ruined. He never lasted more than 3 months without a catastrophe. After being bullied in the hospital ward, where other patients even hit him because of his music, he made a final decisive change.
To be a quiet, kind, and nice person.
Blend in, prioritize stability.
But the personal cost is still catastrophic. He's trapped in a marriage with someone who hates and fears me, believing he'll be alone for the rest of my life, with no hope of love. His only solace is his art.
It's a very complex picture of stability. He has housing security with Julia. His potential inheritance will be put in a trust, so it can't be sued away. But that's all overshadowed by the agony of the unresolved marriage, the lost son, and the knowledge that he can't engage in official matters without causing everything to implode.
So we've seen an artist who weaponized chaos and trauma into this vast, explosive creative output. He used music and games to process, to provoke, and to survive. And the core tension is still there, the need for self-disruption versus the crushing personal cost.
And he explicitly stated he wasn't inflicting pain on himself on purpose to make his art good. He was trying to stop the pain. He claims that when the pain seceded, when he found stability in Julia's house, the art actually got better. More voluminous, more professional.
He traded the raw fury of Jordan Peterson Prison of Hate for the reflective productivity of Happy Eating Pattern. And this leaves us with the ultimate provocative thought for you, the learner, to consider. If Brendan Rose's own evidence suggests that his best, most sustained, and most creatively successful art is created not during the suffering, but when stability allows for reflection and controlled production, what does that say about the widely held cultural romanticism of the tortured artist? Is the search for heaven a better source for lasting creation than the experience of hell?
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are plunging into a personal archive, unlike any other we have encountered. It's less a traditional biography and more a blistering, comprehensive, self-written life story. A manifesto, really, that stands to absolutely chaotic decades.
It really is. It's a profound look into the limits of human endurance and creation. We're exploring the detailed sources documenting the life of Brendan Rose, who is known publicly by his highly provocative moniker, the Devil 666.
Yeah, and this archive is incredibly dense. It's often disturbing, and it's completely unapologetic in its focus on controversy, chaos, and art that's just forged in conflict.
And our mission for this deep dive is, I think, really crucial. We need to navigate this raw chronological narrative and try to analyze the central symbiotic relationship within it.
A relationship that's simple, but so destructive. How profound ongoing personal instability, and we're talking multiple institutionalizations, severe medication crises, legal battles, total financial ruin, how that actively and maybe even necessarily fuels this expansive, highly controversial, and self-described religious canon.
Exactly. We have to approach this not as a typical artist profile, but more as a case study in self-mythologizing. Rose explicitly posits a reality where the chaos is the necessary ingredient.
It's not a bug, it's a feature.
Right. The turbulence in his life isn't just reflected in the art, it is the raw material. It's the engine that powers his entire creative output. He seems to view the immense suffering as the legitimate foundation for his self-proclaimed scripture.
That immediately sets the philosophical framework, and it's radical. Before we even look at the timeline, we have to understand his explicit intention to be among, or maybe even the single most controversial figure in music.
Right.
And he sees himself not just as a musician, but as a religious figure in his own right.
And that self-identification is absolutely essential to understanding his work. He claims to have succeeded in creating a large body of songs which form the core of my religious canon, which I worship in earnest. But the truly fascinating psychological layer here, and maybe even a modern marketing layer, is what he calls the name omission strategy.
Okay, let's unpack this. The concept of name omission. Because for a content creator, being ignored is usually the ultimate failure. But here, he's defining himself by what he isn't named and sort of weaponizing controversy to enforce that exclusion.
Precisely. Rose notes that being a content creator whose name is frequently omitted from mainstream discussions or articles is, for him, a proudly important element of his character. He believes the sheer controversy and the disturbing nature of his work forces publications and platforms to address his existence while simultaneously censoring his actual name.
It sounds like a deliberate tactic to create a public feedback loop.
Yeah.
They want to ignore him, but they can't ignore the impact of his creation, so they talk around him.
That talking around the name is exactly the point. He consciously elevates this public avoidance, this self-imposed exclusion, into what he calls a religious character.
Yeah.
He actually links the social taboo surrounding his name to the spiritual importance of the name of God, or, the act of taking the Lord's name in vain. The omission becomes proof of his power, his transgression.
So it transforms professional censorship into a kind of spiritual act of self-definition. He's building a whole mythology around his own public perception. It's a genius piece of performance art wrapped in what might be genuine delusion.
It's the ultimate anti-marketing strategy.
Yeah, if you try to erase me, you only make the taboo stronger. And that is the perfect launch pad for his prolific and often really disturbing output.
So if that's the mindset, let's get into the massive body of work it generated. The sources confirm that Brendan Rose has amassed this staggeringly large canon spanning music and game development, all dedicated to this self-worshipped philosophy.
The output is immense, and you can tell the content is just engineered for maximum disruption. He doesn't mince words about it. He describes his music as increasingly violent, shocking, and menacing.
And that goal is explicitly to scare people. It's not to entertain them gently.
Yeah.
He's actively trying to be a remarkably challenging and disturbing controversial figure.
It's not just venting, right?
Yeah.
This is, in his mind at least, a deliberate theological exercise.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this isn't just about sonic violence. He views this art as scripture, forged in immense personal turmoil. The ultimate purpose of this body of work is transcendent. He notes that when it is his time to die, he will use these very songs, this massive, violent, beautiful, and deeply personal religious canon, to guide myself into the other realm.
Wow. That one sentence recontextualizes everything. The instability he documents in his life story becomes the validation for this scripture. The more he suffers, the more authentic and legitimate the roadmap to the other realm becomes.
The work is literally a survival manual for his soul. It's his personal mythology. And while the music is the core, the culmination of his technical skill is really captured in his masterpiece game, Luciferianism, which was released in 2025.
This is where that game programming degree he initially dismissed as worthless finds its monumental purpose.
Exactly. And let's talk technical achievement for a second, because this point often gets glossed over, but it's so crucial to understanding his internal drive. The sources state this was built by one person.
One person.
With schizophrenia in Unreal Engine 5.4. I mean, that is an enormous undertaking for anyone, let alone someone battling severe mental health challenges.
It truly is. We're talking about modern AAA-level development tools used by a single, often unmedicated, and later very unstable creator.
The scale is monumental. It's an open-world sandbox billed as an indie roguelike soulslike, and it features over 290 high-quality levels within this construct world of Artifice.
For a solo developer, that volume of level design, coding, asset creation, it requires a rigid, almost superhuman level of focus. It's such a fascinating counterpoint to the extreme volatility of his personal life.
He channels his need for structure into the technical discipline that UE5 development demands.
And the philosophical depth, it seems, matches the technical challenge. He's not making a simple fantasy game here.
Not at all. The game draws heavily from ancient and very dense philosophical works. He sets it up as a strange and lingering religious poem in game form. He cites Friedrich Nietzsche's Zarathustra, Plato's Allegory of the Cave, and crucially, Gnosticism.
Okay, we should pause on Gnosticism, because that's a dense philosophical term that just immediately clicks into Rose's narrative. For listeners who might be unfamiliar, what's the quick connection here?
Well, Gnosticism, at its simplest, is the belief that the material world we inhabit is fundamentally flawed, that it was created not by a true benevolent God, but by a lesser corrupt deity, often called the demiurge.
And true salvation only comes through gnosis, or secret divine knowledge.
Exactly. So if his game is structured as a Gnostic poem, and it takes place in the construct world of Artifice, then the game world itself is fundamentally corrupt. It's designed to trap the soul.
So the challenge of the game, the difficulty, is the struggle to gain that gnosis and escape the demiurge's prison.
Precisely. The extreme difficulty of the soulslike genre perfectly mirrors the struggle required to attain true knowledge and freedom in that Gnostic framework. Whether it's the music designed to scare people or the game built around brutal difficulty and esoteric philosophy, the core message remains the same. Intense challenge and self-defined meaning, forged outside of conventional reality.
But this incredible ambition and technical discipline, it was almost permanently derailed early on by a small, nihilistic act of provocation, which is critical to the story, the Steam ban of 2019.
This was the true catalyst for his professional ruin. His main platform account was banned because of an earlier, unnamed, highly provocative game he created, purely, in his own words, just trying to piss people off. He even admits that earlier game was an atrocity.
But if his stated goal is to be the most controversial figure, why did losing this platform cause such deep multi-year pain? It seems contradictory.
That's the contradiction we have to challenge. The source reveals that the impact was immense and crippling, precisely because the ban ruined his ability to sell his earlier, less nihilistic title, Kingdom of Lies. He experienced immense guilt toward those early customers who had supported his legitimate commercial venture.
So the controversy was fine when he controlled it.
Right, but financial ruin and letting down his customers were not. It seems, even though he champions chaos, he still craved legitimacy and stability on a commercial platform.
He was devastated for years.
Yes, mourning the loss of his ability to participate in that commercial ecosystem. It's a significant psychological split. The source notes he only truly forgave Steam when they finally reinstated his account years later, allowing him to publish Luciferianism.
It just shows how fragile an independent creator's livelihood is when it's resting on the mercy of these huge digital platforms. And how even the most cynical creator still wants an audience and, a marketplace.
Yeah.
Now we need to move chronologically to the foundation of the chaos, starting around 2016. The narrative begins with a moment of profound personal trauma and reconciliation, the death of his father.
A deeply poignant moment. Rose recounts visiting his dying father, who offered an apology for past behavior. Rose accepted, he granted forgiveness, and his father, in a final gesture, bought him 2 specific video games, Stella Glow and Etrian Odyssey Untold 2.
That moment of closure, followed immediately by loss, it serves as a major emotional turning point. It suggests a search for stability that was immediately thwarted by grief.
And the decade leading up to this was defined by grinding isolation and poverty, which really establishes the baseline environment for his later struggles.
He lived in what he vividly described as a roach-infested nightmare of an apartment.
An existence that wasn't solitary, though. It was shared with his constant companion, the cat Neko. And Neko wasn't just a pet, he was his entire stable family structure for years. This is a critical detail, considering the immense pain Rose later associates with Neko's fate.
But even before the marriage, his struggles with mental health treatment began to establish this core pattern of self-sabotage that would just define his life.
The cycle began in earnest in September 2018. His mother called an ambulance, which resulted in his first noted institutionalization. He describes the experience as like hell, and tellingly, his music immediately turned furious, violent, and angry. It's a direct, raw output of the trauma.
And the most painful aspect of this period is his self-awareness regarding his medication.
Oh, yeah. He admits in the source that he was already flushing my medication, a foolish vice that would ruin me again. This is the foundational feedback loop. Stopping medication leads to a crisis, which leads to institutionalization and then immediate, furious artistic creation.
The art is fueled by the self-inflicted damage.
Exactly. It's during this early crisis that he produced these intense, angry songs like Jordan Peterson, Prison of Hate, and Corporation.
Then the narrative shifts dramatically with the arrival of Jill and Yu at the end of 2019. And rather than being a stabilizing force, the marriage seems to have introduced a new, extreme level of interpersonal chaos that just quickly accelerated his spiral.
The foundation of this relationship was built on anxiety, not confidence or trust. He quickly rushed the marriage, worried that she would leave him due to his deep-seated problems performing in bed.
So this fear of inadequacy and abandonment set the stage for immediate, desperate conflict. He was willing to sacrifice stability for just presence.
And the signs of conflict and untrustworthiness were immediate. They set the tone for the entire relationship.
They were. Only 2 months in, she took pictures with another man. And worse, the night before the wedding, she exchanged hearts with another man.
The source notes the minister was in disbelief during the ceremony, which just provides such a vivid, almost comical illustration of the tension and volatility surrounding their union from the very beginning.
So the foundation of the marriage was already set by financial sabotage and emotional chaos, even before his deepest mental spiral. He attempted stability, but she immediately introduced these destructive forces.
He took a security job from December 2019 to January 2021, explicitly trying to earn money and stabilize his life. But Jielin's behavior, it seems, followed him right into his workplace. He recounts her giving him hell at work, constantly texting him ridiculous fights, screaming at me and berating me.
It sounds like a sustained psychological assault designed to destabilize him while he was just trying to work.
And the financial element, which becomes so central to his later ruin, it began right here.
The financial sabotage was devastating.
He states it flatly. She would steal all my work money and run off. We're talking about a man already struggling financially, trying to hold down a security job, only to have his wages systematically stolen by his partner. This established a deep, foundational betrayal centered on money.
And coupled with this was the profound abandonment that contributed to his paranoia.
She would go missing all night long, coming back the next day or 2 or even 3 days later, never appropriately explaining where she went. He notes this happened more times than I am comfortable with. This documented pattern of theft, deception, and disappearance didn't just hurt him, it provided the specific, tangible, raw fuel for his later, most extreme accusations against her, which we will get into.
Right. He wasn't just inventing paranoia. He was reacting to a clear pattern of betrayal. The personal instability, the interpersonal conflict, and the creative fury. It all reaches a fever pitch in 2021, a period he calls the Valhalla arc. Jilin became pregnant with their son, Muji.
A life-altering event that he treats with skepticism even in his own narrative, writing, "If she even gave me his real name."
This critical life change, imminent fatherhood, coincided precisely with the most dangerous act of self-sabotage in the entire memoir.
He lowered his medication to next to nothing, and then a month later, he ditched the doctor and medication entirely. This combination of high-stakes personal change and chemical deregulation was just explosive. He admits it himself. My insanity would start to build at this point.
And this unmedicated volatility, coupled with his deep-seated fear of betrayal, led directly to a legal crisis that would define the next 2 years.
The internal fighting intensified rapidly. It was spurred by his anger over Jilin visiting strangers for hours, men mostly. He texted her a massive fight. When she eventually showed up at the apartment, she ran upstairs and he locked the door to his mother's study.
To protect himself, or maybe just retreat from the confrontation?
Right. And that retreat triggered the infamous door incident, which resulted in police involvement.
She found a wooden plank, which she tried to use to break down the door.
And the source material captures Rose's completely compromised state of mind during this moment. His own narration highlights the terrifying ambiguity of the threat. He admits, I guess to kill me or maybe to hug me, who knows?
That uncertainty is crucial. It shows that he was unable to discern intent. Was she trying to commit violence, or was this a desperate attempt to connect?
Yeah.
His fear state just rendered reality incomprehensible.
And despite being the victim of the attempted home damage, he immediately regretted calling the police. He was begging the officers not to charge her.
He tried to withdraw the complaint, recognizing the severe consequences of the state intervening, especially with Jilin being heavily pregnant.
But the cops' response was definitive. In a case like this, we have to charge. The result was Jilin's arrest and a court-ordered no-contact order, forcing her to move out while heavily pregnant and creating this permanent legal fissure in their relationship.
And this legal mess led to a specific act of self-sabotage that spilled over into his art. He literally tried to sabotage his own court case.
This is a fascinating use of art as a weapon. Rose admits to making horrible music, what he calls I'm the bad guy music, explicitly designed to botch the case and turn public opinion, or even police opinion, against himself.
So he hoped that if he appeared unstable or violent through his art, the charges against Jilin would be dropped.
That is the ultimate destructive feedback loop. His chaos created a legal problem, and his creative response to the problem was to create more chaos, preventing any professional resolution. He was using his public identity to manipulate a legal outcome in a high-stakes, real-world conflict.
Which confirms how unreliable his narrative must be during this arc.
Ultimately, Jilin dragged the case on for months, refused to apologize, and instead took a minimal penalty of just 2 weeks of anger management.
After the legal battle finally concluded, the ensuing fallout forced the next devastating loss: the complete divestment of his remaining family structure, his pets. The sources describe this as just utterly soul-crushing.
He had to rehome his dog, Loki, and the cats, Tequila and Neko, who were his last remaining anchors to stability. The account of Loki's loss is particularly heartrending. Rose recounts tricking Loki into thinking he was going for a walk, only to hand him over to a flat-faced dog charity, and the aftermath of that loss is described with such visceral pain. He saw photos of Loki later, looking so sad, and wrote that losing him crushed his soul.
Loki's trusting nature was betrayed by Rose's necessity, which just added a layer of guilt to the profound grief.
And the cat, Tequila, was similarly dropped at a shelter, only to be picked up by Jilin, who then subsequently gave her away to a friend, an extension of the betrayal.
And then there's Neko, the original companion for the roach-infested nightmare apartment.
Neko was the final, devastating casualty. After Rose's own subsequent institutionalization and arrest, Neko had to be sent to the pound. Jilin agreed to pick Neko up, but later, her father only stated that Neko was with a friend without providing any proof. The lack of verifiable proof surrounding Neko's location became the final, definitive loss of his domestic life, paving the way for his deepest psychological and financial collapse.
So the loss of his entire family structure, wife, child, in his mind at least, and his pets, led directly to this cycle of extreme poverty and hospitalization, stretching from 2022 into 2024. He stated the pattern with brutal clarity. Every time I go off my medication, I ruin my life.
The self-awareness is just striking, even if he couldn't break the cycle at the time. The financial desperation was extreme, and it was exacerbated by his reliance on disability assistance. He was on ODSP, the Ontario Disability Support Program.
And for those unfamiliar, ODSP provides income support to people with disabilities in Ontario, Canada.
Yeah.
But the support is meager.
It's extremely difficult to live on. He was receiving approximately $1,100 a month. Now, consider his fixed costs. His uncle charged $600 for rent, and $180 was required for necessary internet access for his creative work.
If you do that arithmetic, that leaves him with roughly $320 a month for everything else.
Yeah.
food, clothing, transportation.
That's less than $10 a day. And this financial strain directly intersected with his critical medical needs.
This is where the spiral accelerates.
He describes being too broke and depressed for bus fare, or even lacking the energy to walk the required 1.5 hours round trip for his necessary injections. He ditched his medications again, leading to severe instability, which in turn combined with the lack of funds to cause painful starvation.
The description of his diet during this period is incredibly visceral in the source material.
He notes that his only available food was inedible legumes from the food bank, which he describes as being like eating stones. This is the point where we move beyond mere financial stress into existential survival. The physical pain of starvation amplified the psychological chaos from the lack of medication, creating an environment just ripe for paranoia and intense, angry art.
And while he was starving, he was living near Toronto's Chinatown and Kensington Market. And this environment became the backdrop for his Captain Ahab, the lone oppressor arc of music.
This music was a direct creative reaction to his feelings of persecution. He describes the music as shocking, frightened, and offended, designed to externalize his internal terror. He felt actively persecuted by the community there, mocked, insulted, threatened, and even violently assaulted when people took a metal rod and tried to beat me to death.
And his explanation for this hostility is filtered entirely through his paranoia and his political lens.
Right. He attributes this hostility to jealousy from what he terms SJWs, or social justice warriors, viewing himself as a target of ideological purity tests. Whether or not that perception is accurate, it demonstrates how his unmedicated state transformed everyday hostility and societal rejection into this systematic persecution narrative that fed his creative output.
This creative reaction also resulted in one of his great unseen technical achievements, the unpublished, massive, 60 kilobit, sexually explicit porn game harmony.
A perfect metaphor for this volatile period.
Yeah.
He poured immense technical skill into it, building it in Unreal Engine 4.27, but it was utterly blocked from distribution. The file size, platform restrictions, Steam was still locked to him, and Epic didn't allow pornography.
So it was a massive effort, a complex, technically proficient creation that yielded no public reward or commercial benefit. The definition of a nihilistic masterpiece.
And the chaos inevitably led to the most expensive confrontation of his life, what he calls the Kingston Road expulsion. His behavior and controversial music led the Condo Corporation to file a lawsuit specifically to expel him from the building.
This wasn't just an eviction. It was a full-scale legal battle driven by the disruption he was causing. The financial detail attached to this is just staggering. It demonstrates the true monetary cost of his sustained instability to other people.
Walk us through the numbers here, because $100,000 is an extraordinary amount for this context.
The Condo Corporation, utilizing their lawyer Julia Pessin, spent months fighting him. They incurred an approximate cost of $100,000 on the condo tab, which was then legally passed on to the residents, his neighbors, just to secure his departure.
That is the financial weight of an unchecked mental health crisis and artistic provocation. It turned his personal struggle into a massive collective debt for the residents.
And the lawyer's perspective he quotes is utterly cynical, yet it reveals the mechanics of the legal machine he was up against.
Rose quotes Julia Pessin telling him, "Off the record, I'm sorry for your situation, but I only care about getting paid, and I get paid no matter who wins." This interaction is so crucial. It underscores his realization that his chaos wasn't personal to the institution, it was just a profitable endeavor for the professionals involved.
It forces him to see the objective consequences of his behavior outside of his own self-serving narrative.
He eventually voluntarily left, feeling remorse for the residents who were paying the bill. He notes a moment of relief when he saw the new lady judge with pronouns in her bio, which signified to him that the fight was over and he could finally extricate himself from that vortex of conflict.
So after being expelled from the condo, facing time in a motel, and nearly becoming homeless, the narrative pivots sharply, almost unbelievably, to what Rose describes as finding heaven in Toronto.
He found the House of Julia, a downtown apartment in the best part of downtown Toronto. The physical stability was an immense upgrade from the roach-infested apartment and the expensive, volatile condo. But the true salvation, it seems, came from the human connection.
The landlord, Julia, an 83-year-old grandmother, became his stability, his anchor.
He calls her the most wonderful grandma I ever met. And despite his previous volatile marriage, he finds such profound domestic peace that he muses on his strange current setup. Did I leave my wife and I'm now living in sin with an 83-year-old grandma? I think I am because I love her.
It's clearly not a romantic relationship. It's a relationship of care, respect, and non-judgmental stability that he desperately lacked.
And this new environment, the Julia arc, is defined by a very important creative shift. The music didn't stop, but it got explicitly better when the pain subsided.
Which contradicts the whole idea that suffering is necessary for genius.
It absolutely does. This is a critical insight. The songs created during this period, like Caesar's Legion, Blood Angel and the Caravan, and Final Gas Station Attendant, they dwarf all his previous work in quality, complexity, and scope. The shift is from immediate reactive rage to these mythological, complex narratives.
Let's analyze how the music changed. What defines this better sound and content?
Well, the themes move away from personal feuds, starvation, and police conflict, and towards historical and philosophical explorations. Take Caesar's Legion, for example. It includes a long speech detailing Hegelian dialectics, the philosophical concept that knowledge advances through the clash of thesis and antithesis.
And what's the link between Hegelian dialectics and this new arc of his life?
The song uses this concept to argue for the inevitability of military dictatorship over fragile democracy. So he's now processing his trauma and societal observations through these intellectual, complex frameworks rather than just shouting about them. The rage is still there, but it's channeled into world building and analysis, not pure emotional output.
He's moved from personal chaos to universal myth.
Exactly. And his current projects also reflect a hard-earned commitment to commercial viability and legal safety, which indicates a new maturity.
He acquired Suno AI, an advanced music generation tool, specifically to make copyright-happy songs. He owns both the bass tracks and vocals entirely.
And this is significant because it removes the risk of infringement that plagued his earlier highly sampled works. He is actively professionalizing and insulating himself from the kind of legal complications that contributed to that $100,000 expulsion. It's his biggest project in years, driven by caution and technical innovation.
And his ultimate goal for the future reflects the painful lessons learned, particularly from his institutionalizations.
He recounts being bullied and assaulted by other patients in the ward. This terrifying experience led him to a definitive conclusion. He decided to become a simple, quiet, nice person. He strives to listen and solve things diplomatically, and crucially, to diligently adhere to his medication.
The pain, which he once chased to fuel his art, is now the ultimate enemy he seeks to avoid, leading him to pursue non-institutionalized stability at all costs. But despite this profound newfound tranquility and artistic success in the Julia arc, the central conflict of his past, the marriage to Jalen, remains an insoluble legal track, preventing him from fully moving on.
He notes the absurdity of his situation. He desperately wants a divorce, but he's been through 4 separate lawyers, all of whom quit in rage and frustration at him. He remains trapped in legal limbo, knowing that representing himself would be suicidally dangerous and not advisable.
And this raises the critical question of the unreliable narrator. How does his own documented history of provocation, specifically toward lawyers, contribute to his trapped in limbo status?
It creates a perfect self-fulfilling prophecy. He admits to recording arguments with one lawyer, Arthur C. Brown, with the intention of turning those very arguments into songs. His volatile behavior and his provocative artistic response to real-world conflicts literally repel the very professionals he needs to untangle the mess he created.
So he can't accept stability, even when it's offered through legal means, unless he is in absolute control of the narrative.
Exactly. And since Jalen has completely refused communication, seemingly ducking service by disconnecting her phone and possibly moving out of the city or even the country, he's been forced to seek emotional closure through psychological rather than legal means.
And this brings us to the ultimate, definitive emotional rejections that he declared on November 16th, 2025. These are not legal facts. They function as a psychological break from the past.
Let's process these declarations because they are the ultimate act of creative revisionism in his own story.
There are 3 absolute, unverified statements he makes.
First, Jalen Yu. She is the devil, unironically not a metaphor, she is the devil. Followed by, Neko is dead. And finally, he is not my son.
The narrator needs Jilin to be the literal devil to rationalize the immense suffering and loss. It creates a definitive break that the frustrating legal system can't provide. But let's look at how he arrives at these conclusions using the Neko incident as the template for this psychological process.
The source material is remarkably candid about his reasoning. He concluded Neko was dead because Jilin's father, when asked, failed to provide a picture of the cat, who was supposedly with a friend. Rose immediately took this absence of photographic proof, blocked the father, and declared the cat murdered or dead.
What's fascinating here is the psychological mechanism at work. The narrator explicitly converts the absence of information, the lack of a clear answer or photograph, into a definite negative fact.
This is the critical insight into the unreliable nature of his current perspective. He constructs his reality around the certainty of betrayal. The lack of proof validates the worst possible outcome in his mind, which provides him the necessary emotional clarity to move forward. Uncertainty is unbearable, so he fills the void with definitive, tragic certainty.
And this mechanism is applied directly to the most profound wound, the paternity of his son.
The doubt was initially seeded by Gielin's earlier cruelty, telling him, "You don't deserve a baby." But the definitive declaration, "He is not my son," comes without any DNA confirmation. This declaration serves as the ultimate emotional weapon to reject the shattered family unit, using the same pattern established by the Neko incident.
By declaring his son not his, he gains the emotional divorce that the courts refuse to grant him.
And in doing so, he structures his new, tranquil reality around the clean slate of total, final abandonment. It is the final, ultimate piece of art generated by the chaos. The creation of a definitive, self-serving, albeit unverified narrative that allows him to close the door on the painful arc of his life.
#outro.
So what does this extraordinary deep dive into Brendan Rose's chaotic canon mean for you, the listener?
We've traced a life where Rose's existence was a self-sustaining feedback loop. Extreme volatility, largely self-inflicted by medication cessation, drove explosive personal conflicts, which in turn generated his monumental, violent, and highly personal artistic canon.
And the process was messy, expensive, costing one condo corporation $100,000, and devastatingly painful.
We saw the painful journey, starvation, hospitalization, legal paralysis, driven music, and the commitment to a quiet life. The paradox is that he found artistic success only when he stopped intentionally seeking chaos. And yet, in his mind, the entire chaotic process was necessary to create the core of his religious canon. The ultimate goal of the art is transcendent. It's designed to outlive the man and guide him into the next realm.
The memoir notes that when it is time to die, Rose plans to use his songs, this massive, violent, beautiful, and deeply personal religious canon, to guide myself into the other realm.
The question we leave you with, then, is this. If the art is intended to serve as a roadmap to the afterlife, and if the profound cost and chaos detailed in the life that created it was, in the creator's view, the necessary engine of that art, does the artistic merit ultimately justify the scale of human suffering, both his own and that inflicted upon others, that defined its creation? It's a question of whether the spiritual payoff can ever outweigh the material debt.
So, today we're diving into a pretty raw and deeply personal document. It's the autobiography of an artist named Brendan Rose. And he makes this pretty bold claim that to understand his art, what he calls his canon, you first have to understand his life. So, let's do that. Let's explore his story in his own words. Okay, so right off the bat, we get a very famous quote with a really weird twist. It's not attributed to Blade Runner, but to Elon Musk. This kind of sets the tone, right? It tells us we're in for a unique and maybe unconventional personal story. And here it is, his big ambition, straight from him. He's not just trying to make art. He's literally attempting to build a kind of personal religion with his own life's work as its central text. And he's intentionally positioning himself as this challenging, controversial figure. So that's the premise we're going to run with here. We're going to walk through the major events of his life just as he lays them out. Because according to him, you just can't separate the art from the artist's story. It's all one and the same. All right, so where does a story like this even start? Let's get into the foundation of his whole artistic journey and this central idea that really defines his public identity. Okay, one of the core ideas here is something he calls the secret name. He says that when people talk about him, they often don't use his name, and he actually encourages this. He thinks it creates this weird feedback loop that gives his whole character this almost religious vibe, like a god whose name you're not supposed to say. Now, the story of his art really kicks into gear right here, in 2018. He points to this exact moment, right after his father passed away, as the real, serious beginning of his music career. And from that point on, things get, pretty chaotic. He enters this period that he describes as a cycle of intense personal crises. But here's the thing, he doesn't just see them as bad times, he sees them as the raw material for his art. And you can really see how things escalate over time. In 2018, it starts with conflicts with his mom that land him in an institution for the first time. Then, 2019 is a mixed bag. His professional life takes a nosedive when his game gets banned from Steam, but that's also the year he gets married. By 2021, though, it all hits a breaking point, with a domestic dispute that leads to him and his wife being separated by a no-contact order. And this is a perfect example of what he's talking about, that direct line from crisis to creation. A major life event happens, getting institutionalized after a fight with his mother, and boom, a specific piece of art comes out of it. He says that experience is what led him to write the song Jordan Peterson, Prison of Hate. He's also really self-aware about one of the key triggers for all this instability. He calls it a foolish vice, repeatedly flushing his medication. And he's brutally honest that this one decision would, in his words, ruin me again and again for years. So all of this cycle of crisis, it all builds up to what he calls the absolute bottom, the lowest point of his entire story. And it all happens while he's living alone in a condo on Kingston Road. And man, the way he describes it, it's just this incredibly fast, steep downward spiral. First, he's totally isolated, loses his wife, his son, even his pets. Then he's broke, like can't afford food or bus fare for meds broke. So he stops taking his medication and says he pretty much starved for weeks. And it's right there at rock bottom that he claims he made the best music of my life. And he's not subtle about this connection either. He says point blank that as his life got worse and worse, his music got more and more incredible, even calling it terrifying and beautiful. The way he tells it, this whole chapter comes to this really dramatic end. The police get involved, they have to cut open his door, and they find him inside, naked, in the lotus position. And that's it. He's arrested and hospitalized again. That's the end of the Kingston Road affair. Okay, so after that absolute low point, the story starts to shift. We move into what seems like a recovery phase, a time of, fragile stability. And he gives this period a name, the Julia arc. But getting there wasn't easy. He talks about a legal battle that got him kicked out of his condo, a short time being homeless, but eventually he finds a room for rent in a house downtown that he just calls perfect. And the absolute heart of this new chapter is his 83-year-old landlady, Julia. He talks about her with so much affection, saying it's like a family. You can really feel that sense of peace and belonging. And that's why this whole era of his life is named after her, the Julia arc. But, and this is a big but, that piece is hanging by a thread. He's very clear that there are these huge unresolved problems still hanging over him. He feels trapped in his marriage, he can't see his son, he can't even get a lawyer to stick with his case. So this stability he's found, it's sitting on some pretty shaky ground. Which brings us pretty much up to the present day and how he looks back on all of this, on the art that came out of this incredibly turbulent life. And what's really fascinating is how he's actually structured his own body of work. He's broken it down into these artistic arcs, and each one lines up perfectly with a specific and usually chaotic period of his life that we've just talked about. It's like he's handed us a map to his own life and art. But out of all of it, he points to one thing as his masterpiece, his magnum opus. It's a free-to-play video game called Luciferianism. He calls it a religious poem in game form. And I think this is so important. He makes sure to mention that it was built by one guy with schizophrenia. He's tying his diagnosis, his identity, directly to the work he's most proud of. And this quote really feels like it brings his story to a place of, acceptance. He seems to have made peace with the fact that the whole family man thing isn't in the cards for him. Instead, he's found happiness in his current life with Julia, and he says he's grateful for it. He doesn't want another one. And I want to leave you with this one last thought because it's a really interesting point he makes himself. He pushes back hard on the idea that he was hurting himself on purpose to make his art better. He says the pain was just inflicted on him, and that when the pain finally started to go away, the art actually got better, not worse. He's saying his art was a response to suffering, not a product of it. And that really makes you wonder, right? What is the real connection between an artist's pain and what they create?
Welcome to The Debate. Today, we're immersing ourselves in the world of content creator Brendan Rose, specifically through his extensive memoir. We're focusing on the very volatile relationship between his periods of severe personal crisis and the quality of his prodigious artistic output. We're talking music, games, the whole lot.
And the source material really does present this classic dichotomy. It's the romantic idea of the tortured artist, right? But that's set against the practical reality that sophisticated work often needs calm, it needs structure.
Absolutely. Which brings us to the central question we really have to wrestle with today. When you look at his whole body of work, his canon, does the evidence suggest his most profound, his most defining art was a direct result of that extreme mental instability and suffering?
Or did the true maturation, the real quality, and the sustained achievement of his career, did that emerge primarily during periods of, let's call it, relative stability and focused effort?
Right. And I'll be arguing that crisis, that chaotic instability, was the essential crucible for his peak artistic intensity and his cultural velocity. The work that really defined him came from that turbulence.
And I'll be arguing from the other side. I believe the evidence points toward stability. While chaos provided the raw material, that high-quality, lasting creative achievement, well, that was contingent upon him finding structure, peace, and applying the skills he'd learned.
So my core position is pretty straightforward. The most potent and defining works, the ones that earned him the most notoriety and arguably his status as this challenging, visionary figure, they sprang directly from the deepest troughs of crisis. The creativity was fueled by pure anger, despair, and often, his withdrawal from medication. We see this pattern right after the 2018 institutionalizations. He describes himself as being just furious, and the music immediately reflects that. That period gave us these intensely negative, violent songs like Jordan Peterson, Prison of Hate, and Corporation. It's pure, unfiltered emotion turned directly into art.
I mean, that intensity is undeniable, but the key question is whether that intensity equals quality. I would argue that stability is the prerequisite for real quality, because the chaos of those early years led to well-documented artistic failures. His early work from the Andy Saga, for instance, the Golden Age of Loki album, he explicitly calls it truly terrible. He says it was beyond poo, they were super poo. So in that case, instability fostered low-quality work.
Okay, fair.
And more than that, if we look at sustained output, the evidence shifts dramatically. His acknowledged masterpiece, the game Luciferianism, this complex open-world sandbox in Unreal Engine 5.4, was completed years later. This was after his final institutionalization in 2024, after he made a public commitment to stop quitting his medication and become a quieter person. The sheer scale of that project fundamentally required stability.
The structure of the game is compelling, I'll give you that. But I have to return to the music, because the music is the foundation of his public persona. The chaotic, menacing stuff from the Chinatown period, the Captain ACAB arc, that was explicitly designed to provoke and scare people. This isn't about refinement, it's about immediate, visceral impact.
But is impact the same as achievement?
Well, let's consider the Kingston Road crisis. This was a period of extreme isolation, no medication, self-imposed starvation, a peak moment of suffering. And yet he claims this crisis led to incredible music that was terrifying, beautiful, shocking, the best music of my life, including the track Long Live the New Flesh. The defining intensity happened precisely when he was at his most unstable.
That is a powerful subjective claim from that moment, but it contrasts so sharply with his later, more quantitative assessment. And this, for me, is the most overwhelming evidence for stability. The Julia arc. This period spanned 3 years in what he calls a perfect home, heaven basically, with strict adherence to his medication. The sheer volume of work he produced, he says, dwarfs every other arc I ever made, put together, into oblivion.
Volume, yes, but
it's not just volume. He makes a clear qualitative judgment. He says, these hundreds of songs are so much better than any other songs I've made in my life. The author himself places his highest value on the work he created in an environment of sustained peace. That suggests the raw intensity of a crisis just can't match the compositional maturity that comes with stability.
Right, and that brings us straight to our first big point of contention. What even is the peak of his artistic canon? You're relying heavily on his later judgment that the Julia Arc material is so much better. But what does better even mean in this context?
Well, I think it means what it says. Higher quality.
I'm not so sure. I'd submit that better in the Julia art context means more technically proficient, maybe more palatable. It reflects his contentment. My perspective is that the best music of my life claim, the one attached to Kingston Road, refers to its raw power, its ability to shock, its cultural impact. So how do you reconcile that? Are we looking for the most sophisticated work or the work that most fundamentally defines his controversial identity?
I'm just not convinced that intensity automatically translates into enduring artistic value, especially when the artist himself basically retracts that statement later by elevating the stable work. We're comparing the immediate visceral punch of the Crisis tracks, it's like scream therapy on a record, against the more complex, structured material from the Julia arc.
Uh-huh.
The quality metric has to favor execution and sustainability over just sheer emotional volume. The Julia art music, by dwarfing everything else and achieving a new level of sophistication, shows that stability let him capitalize on his skills, not just react to trauma.
But that cultural velocity being the most controversial figure in music, that was the measure of success he was chasing. The Kingston Road music was a deliberate, almost weaponized sound. The memoir even notes that during the Julia arc, he eventually stopped playing my music when I'm walking around to avoid fights. That suggests a retreat from the very confrontational edge that characterized his most impactful, crisis-driven work.
So it shifts the debate from quality to provocation.
Exactly.
Well, let's pivot then to contention 2, the contrast between that kind of flashpoint creation and focused, sustained labor. You're right to highlight that his breakdowns often resulted in these immediate bursts of music, like the hip-hop tracks from the Jail arc. It shows art as an immediate, unfiltered response.
Precisely. It shows that trauma acts as this immediate creative trigger. It just bypasses the slow, deliberate process of composition. The art is an instant transcription of chaos, a sonic journal of acute suffering.
And that's a compelling point for instantaneous creation. But let's go back to the truly monumental work in his catalog. Luciferianism. We're talking about an open-world sandbox, an environment-rich indie roguelike with over 290-plus high-quality levels. This thing was developed in Unreal Engine 5.4.
Right.
The technical requirements for that alone, the coding, the bug fixing, the level design, that demands immense executive function and years of meticulous effort. You simply cannot do that during a period of active crisis. It's structurally impossible. This massive achievement completely refutes the idea that only chaos is necessary. The structured academic training he had in game programming was the engine that stability finally allowed him to run.
You raise an excellent point about the technical demands of gaming. It's a different beast than the immediate burst of music production. However, isn't it worth asking if the sheer vision for Luciferianism, a game about the author's internal hellscape, might have been conceived during a crisis and just realized later when stability permitted it? The fuel may still be the trauma, even if the engine is stability.
That's possible, sure. But execution is artistry. A vision without realization is just potential. If we accept that the application of skill is what creates the masterpiece, then stability becomes the essential ingredient. Flashpoint creation can make a powerful song, but sustained, severe chaos cannot complete a 290-level game. Which I think moves us into our third contention, which is the author's own late-stage reflection on this whole dynamic. And it seems to strongly support my thesis.
It does. Go on.
It's a crucial piece of evidence. Late in the memoir, after he's achieved stability and finished Luciferianism, he states, and I'm quoting here, "I was not inflicting pain on myself on purpose to make my art good. Pain was inflicted on me. I was trying to stop it. When the pain seceded, the art got better, not worse." This self-assessment is key. He's rejecting that romanticized, tortured artist idea himself.
It's an interesting point, but we have to scrutinize the context of that reflection. That statement comes during his conscious change of mind in 2024, where he decides he wants to be a quieter person and blend in. It's a social strategy born out of a desire to avoid the immense suffering and agony of more institutionalizations.
So you think he's revising his own history?
I think it's possible he felt compelled to recast the narrative of his suffering as accidental rather than essential, maybe to protect his newfound peace. The praise for the Julia Arc music might just reflect his personal contentment, a feeling of being home, but it doesn't necessarily mean he recaptured that fierce artistic edge that defined his career.
Okay, but we have to reevaluate the metric. The most provocative material, the stuff that made him a challenging and disturbing, controversial figure, was undeniably linked to instability. I mean, think of the albums he made by recording arguments with his lawyer, Arthur C. Brown, to make Arthur C. Brown Ace Attorney. That kind of raw, legally complicated art only emerges when stability is fundamentally ruptured.
I see that, but if the work gets better, more complex, more voluminous, more enduring when the pain recedes, as he explicitly says, then the romantic view of crisis as catalyst just has to be set aside. The raw material of pain fueled the initial output, yes, but it was discipline, technical skill, and a stable environment that allowed for the refinement needed for his greatest achievements. We're talking about the difference between a scream and a symphony.
I agree that structural control allows for something like Luciferianism. But what's lost when stability takes over? The period of crisis gave him a signature sound that was unmatched in its intensity. That raw material defined his reputation and set the stage for everything that followed, even if the later works were technically superior. So in conclusion, I'd maintain that the defining characteristics of his public persona, the controversial music, the art defined by disruption, were inextricably linked periods of extreme duress. Crisis generated the signature fuel, even if volume was achieved later.
And my summary really stands on the foundation of structured achievement, the author's own timeline, particularly completing Luciferianism, and the quality and volume of the Julia arc, indicates that artistic refinement and lasting achievement were contingent upon finding stability and applying the skills he learned. The memoir tracks a clear movement from chaos-driven bursts to stability-enabled mastery.
So the memoir really presents this compelling, maybe uncomfortable duality. Crisis provided the initial fierce subject matter, but a functional, stable environment was necessary for the systematic creation of what he acknowledges are his technical and compositional masterpieces.
Which forces anyone engaging with this work to ask a crucial question. Does artistic merit lie primarily in that raw, chaotic, defining expression, or in its successful, structured, and enduring realization? The answer, as always, is far from simple.